Imagine a world where the richest man in the city lives in total darkness, his heart frozen colder than the New York winter outside his penthouse windows. He has everything, billions, power, luxury beyond dreams, but no one has ever touched his soul until one ordinary woman walks into his life, pushing a cleaning cart, wearing a simple maid's uniform. She's not chasing his money. She's not impressed by his name. She just sees a lonely man and offers him kindness no one else ever dared to give. One small act of compassion. One cup of tea on a stormy night. One smile that refuses to fade. And slowly, impossibly, the ice around a billionaire's heart begins to melt. What happens when true kindness collides with unbreakable wealth? When love doesn't care about status, bank accounts, or what the world expects? This is a breathtaking true love story of a maid who changed everything, and the billionaire who finally learned how to feel alive. Stay till the end, because this ending will leave you speechless and believing in love again. Let's begin in the glittering chaos of New York City, where skyscrapers pierced the cloud and fortunes rose and fell with the stock market's whim. Elena Ramirez pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the penthouse suite atop the Avalon Tower. At 28, she had the weary grace of someone who had learned early that life rarely handed out favors. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, and her smile, warm, genuine, could light up even the coldest room. She was just a maid, one of dozens who kept the ultra-luxury residences spotless for the elite, but Elena carried herself with a quiet dignity that made her unforgettable. The penthouse belonged to Alexander Voss, the reclusive billionaire whose tech empire had redefined artificial intelligence and made him one of the richest men under 40. At 35, Alexander was a legend. Brilliant, ruthless in boardrooms, and utterly alone. His days were consumed by deals worth billions, his nights by insomnia and the faint echo of a childhood scar by betrayal. He rarely spoke to anyone beyond curt instructions, and his staff knew better than to linger. The man was ice, unbreakable, unyielding. It started on a rainy Tuesday in October. Alexander returned early from a trip, jet-lagged and irritable, barking orders at his assistant old phone as he stormed into the suite. Elena was there, polishing the grand piano in the living room, a rare Steinway that no one ever played. She didn't flinch at his entrance. Instead, she glanced up with those deep brown eyes and offered a soft, "Good afternoon, Mr. Voss. I hope your flight was smooth." He barely acknowledged her, tossing his coat onto the sofa she'd just fluffed. But as he disappeared into his study, something caught his eye through the open door. Elena picking up the coat, folding it neatly and placing it on the rack by the entrance without a word of complaint. No sigh, no eye roll, just quiet efficiency laced with kindness. Days turned into weeks, and Elena became a fixture in his routine, though he hardly noticed at first. She arrived at dawn, leaving before he emerged most mornings. Yet small things began to pierce his armored world. One morning, he found his favorite coffee mug, the one he'd shattered in a fit of rage the night before, replaced with an identical new one on the counter, alongside a handwritten note. "Accidents happen. Have a better day." No signature, but he knew. Another time, during a brutal winter storm that knocked out power across the city, Alexander trudged home to a dark, freezing penthouse. His generator had failed, and his staff had been sent home for safety. But there was Elena, bundled in her coat, lighting candles she'd found in a drawer and brewing tea on a camping stove she'd somehow procured from the building's maintenance closet. "I couldn't leave knowing you'd come back to this," she said simply, handing him a steaming cup. "Chamomile with honey. It helps with the stress." Alexander stared at her, speechless for the first time in years. Who was this woman in his world? People fawned for favors or schemed for scraps of his wealth. But Elena asked for nothing. She listened when he vented about a failed merger, not with pity, but with insightful questions that made him see things anew. She shared stories of her own life, growing up in a small village in Mexico, immigrated with her mother, working double shifts to send money home to her siblings, without a trace of self-pity. Her laughter was infectious, her compassion effortless. Slowly, imperceptibly, the ice around Alexander's heart began to crack. He found himself lingering in the mornings, pretending to read emails while watching her hum softly as she dusted. He started leaving books on the coffee table, classics she'd mentioned loving, and discovering them returned with thoughtful bookmarks and notes in the margins. One evening, after a particularly grueling day where paparazzi had hounded him over a scandalous rumor, he came home to find a plate of homemade empanadas waiting, still warm. For when the world feels too heavy, the note read, "For the first time in decades, Alexander felt seen, not as a billionaire, not as a genius or a tyrant, but as a man." And Elena? She noticed the subtle changes, too. The way his sharp commands softened into questions, the rare smiles that tugged at his lips when she teased him gently about his obsession with black coffee. But she kept her distance, professional and kind, never dreaming that her simple acts of humanity were weaving themselves into the fabric of his soul. Then came the night that changed everything. A gala at the Met, where Alexander was expected to appear and charm investors. He hated those events, the fake smiles, the endless networking, but duty called. As he adjusted his tuxedo in the mirror, frustration mounting because his bow tie refused to cooperate, Elena appeared in the reflection, having stayed late to finish the bedrooms. "Here, let me," she said softly, stepping close. Her fingers brushed his as she expertly tied the knot, her touch light and steady. In that moment, with the city lights sparkling below them, Alexander caught her gaze in the mirror. The air thickened, charged with something unspoken. "You look incredible," he murmured, his voice rougher than intended. Elena's cheeks flushed, but she smiled that radiant smile. "And you'll dazzle them all, Mr. Voss. Just be yourself, the real you, not the one they expect." He turned to face her fully, his hand lingering near hers. "Alexander," he corrected quietly. "Call me Alexander." That night at the gala, as cameras flashed and champagne flowed, Alexander's mind wasn't on the deals or the admirers. It was on the maid who had slipped past his defenses, melting the frost he'd worn like armor for so long. But when he returned home, eager to confess the warmth blooming in his chest, he found the penthouse empty and a resignation letter on the counter. Elena was gone. Heart pounding, Alexander read her words. She'd been offered a better position elsewhere, one that paid more and allowed her to pursue night classes toward her dream of becoming a teacher. "Thank you for the opportunity," she wrote. "You've been more than fair." Fair? He crumpled the paper, a storm raging inside him. She thought that's all this was? A job? No, she couldn't leave. Not when she'd become the light in his shadowed world. Not when he was finally ready to admit that her kindness hadn't just melted his heart, it had awakened it. The next morning, Alexander Voss did something no one expected from the untouchable billionaire. He went looking for her, through the bustling streets of Brooklyn, to the modest apartment she shared with her family, determined to fight for the one person who had ever made him feel truly alive. But when he knocked on her door, rain pouring down once more, Elena opened it with wide, startled eyes, and a secret she hadn't yet revealed, one that would complicate everything. The door swung open wider, and Elena stood there in faded jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time he'd ever seen it that way. Rain streaked down the awning above her brownstone stoop, drumming against the metal like impatient fingers. Her eyes, those warm, fathomless eyes that had haunted him all night, widened in disbelief. "Mr. Voss, Alexander?" She corrected herself quickly, voice barely above the rain. "What are you doing here?" He stood soaked on the threshold, bespoke suit clinging to him, hair plastered to his forehead, looking every bit the man who had lost control for the first time in his adult life. In his hand, he clutched the crumpled resignation letter like a lifeline. "You left," he said, the words rough, almost accusatory, "without saying goodbye." Elena glanced over her shoulder into the apartment, then stepped out onto the stoop, pulling the door half closed behind her. The hallway light spilled a soft glow across her face, revealing faint shadows under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept either. "I didn't think you'd notice," she admitted quietly, "or that it would matter. It was just a job. Just a job." He took a step closer, rain dripping from his lashes. "Elena, you changed everything. You changed me." Her breath caught. She wrapped her arms around herself against the chill, or perhaps against the weight of his words. For weeks she had felt the shift in him, the lingering glances, The small kindnesses he'd begun returning, the way he sometimes waited for her to finish a room, just exchange a few words. But she had convinced herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Men like Alexander Voss didn't fall for maids. That only happened in movies and telenovelas her mother watched late at night. "You deserve someone who fits your world," she said, voice trembling only slightly. "Someone who understands boardrooms and galas, not someone who scrubs floors and takes the subway at 5 in the morning." "I don't want someone who fits my world," he countered fiercely. "I want someone who makes it worth living in. And that's you. It's always been you." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain and the distant wail of a siren. Elena searched his face, looking for the trick, the hidden camera, the moment he would laugh and say this was all a misunderstanding. But there was only raw, unguarded honesty in those storm-gray eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered finally, "before you say anything else." She opened the door fully and gestured for him to come inside. He stepped into the narrow hallway of the walk-up apartment, dripping onto the worn linoleum. The place was small but immaculate. Books stacked neatly on shelves, framed photos of children smiling on the walls, the faint scent of cinnamon and coffee lingering in the air. From the living room came the soft sound of a cartoon playing on television. A little boy, no more than 4, with dark curls in Elena's eyes, peeked around the corner. He clutched a stuffed dinosaur and stared at the tall stranger with open curiosity. "Mama," he called softly. Elena knelt and opened her arms. The boy ran to her, burying his face in her neck. She lifted him easily, settling him on her hip as she faced Alexander again. "This is Matteo," she said, her voice steady now, protective. "My son." Alexander felt the ground tilt beneath him. All the speeches he'd rehearsed in the car, the promises, the pleas, evaporated. He stared at the child, then at Elena, piecing together the quiet phone calls she sometimes took in the service elevator, the days she left early citing family emergencies, the exhaustion she never complained about. "I was going to tell you eventually," she continued, stroking Matteo's hair. "But there never seemed a right moment. His father, he left before Matteo was born. It's always been just us. The new job, it pays enough for daycare and classes, and I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought staying around you any longer would only hurt more when nothing could ever happen." Matteo wriggled down and toddled over to Alexander, unafraid. He held up the dinosaur. "Roar," he said solemnly, offering it. Alexander crouched automatically, accepting the toy with careful hands. "Very fierce," he told the boy gravely, earning a gap-toothed grin. When he looked up at Elena, something fierce and tender warred in his expression. "Nothing could happen?" he repeated softly. "Elena, I don't care about complications. I care about you. Both of you." She shook her head, tears threatening now. "You say that today, but tomorrow there will be headlines. Investors questioning your judgment. Your mother—" "My mother hasn't spoken to me in 15 years, he cut in gently. "And the headlines can scream all they want. I've spent my life building walls to keep the world out. You slipped through without even trying. I'm not letting you go because of what other people might think." Matteo tugged at Alexander's wet sleeve. "You sad?" the boy asked, small brow furrowed. Alexander managed a smile. "Not anymore." Elena watched the exchange, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Every practical instinct screamed at her to protect her son, to choose stability over fairy tales. But the way Alexander looked at Matteo, not with calculation or pity, but with genuine wonder, chipped away at her defenses. "Stay for coffee," she said at last. "Just talk. No promises. Let me think." He nodded, relief flooding his features. "All the time you need." They moved into the tiny kitchen, where Elena busied herself with an old percolator, while Matteo dragged Alexander to the living room rug to play dinosaurs. Alexander sat cross-legged on the floor in his ruined Armani suit, letting the boy climb onto his back for rides, roaring obligingly when prompted. Elena stole glances from the doorway, her chest tight with something she was afraid to name. Over steaming mugs at the scarred wooden table, with Matteo finally asleep on the couch under a knitted blanket, they talked, really talked, for the first time without the barrier of employer and employee. She told him about the fear of raising a child alone in a city that devoured dreamers, about her scholarship to community college starting in January, about her mother's arthritis, and the siblings still in Mexico waiting for remittances. He told her about the father who'd gambled away their fortune, the boarding schools where kindness was weakness, the loneliness that billions couldn't buy away. Hours slipped by. Rain softened to a drizzle. Somewhere in the conversation, his hand found hers across the table, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I want to be part of your life," he said quietly, not as some savior throwing money at problems, as someone who shows up, who learns how to make empanadas without burning them, who reads bedtime stories and attends school plays. "If you'll let me." Elena's eyes shimmered. "You barely know us." "Then let me learn," he replied. "Starting now." The next weeks unfolded like a dream she kept waiting to wake from. Alexander arrived at odd hours with groceries or children's books, insisting on carrying them up 4 flights himself. He sat through Mateo's favorite animated movies 3 times in a row without complaint. He drove Elena to night classes and waited in the parking lot with homework of his own, researching early childhood education programs, quietly arranging scholarships her pride wouldn't let her accept outright. The tabloids caught wind eventually. Grainy photos of New York's most eligible billionaire pushing a swing in a Brooklyn playground exploded across front pages. Headlines screamed Cinderella story or gold digger scandal. His board grumbled about distractions. He ignored them all. One frostless December evening, he took them to see the Rockefeller tree. Mateo rode on his shoulders, awestruck by the lights, while Alexander held Elena close against the cold. Later, over hot chocolate in a tiny cafe, he slid a small velvet box across the table. Not a ring, but delicate silver locket engraved with Mateo's birth date. "Open it," he urged softly. Inside were 2 photos, one of Mateo laughing, the other a candid shot of Elena taken when she wasn't looking, radiant as she read to her son. "I had this made," he said, voice husky, "because family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who chooses to stay." Elena's tears fell into her cocoa. She reached for his hand, squeezing tightly. But even as happiness bloomed, shadows lingered. Alexander's past refused to stay buried. An old business rival, bitter over a long-ago takeover, began leaking fabricated stories to the press about Elena's immigration status, about supposed affairs, anything to destabilize a man who had everything. Threats appeared in anonymous emails. Security became necessary. One night, after a particularly vicious article sent Elena spiraling into doubt, she confronted him in the penthouse he'd begun sharing with them on weekends. "I won't let you lose everything because of me," she said, packing Mateo's overnight bag with shaking hands. "We'll go back to how things were. You can visit, but—" Alexander caught her wrists gently. "I lost everything the day you resigned. The rest is just noise." He pulled her into his arms, feeling her tremble. "We fight this together. I have resources, lawyers, whatever it takes. But I'm not losing you again." As winter deepened, the attacks escalated. A private investigator dug into Elena's past, twisting innocent details into weapons. Her new job offer was mysteriously withdrawn. Fear crept in. Fear for Mateo's safety, for the fragile life they were building. Then, on Christmas Eve, everything came to a head. Alexander had planned a quiet celebration, just the 3 of them, in the penthouse, with a small tree Elena and Mateo had decorated. But when they arrived, the doorman handed Alexander an envelope marked urgent. Inside was a photograph. Elena and Mateo walking into her apartment building, a red circle drawn around them. On the back, scrawled in block letters, "Walk away from her or they pay the price." Alexander's blood turned to ice. He shielded the photo from Elena, but she saw his face and knew. "We're leaving the city," he said immediately, already calling a security team. "Tonight, somewhere safe until this is handled." But Elena stood firm, eyes blazing. "No more running. Not for me, not for my son. We face this together or not at all." As snow began to fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Alexander realized the final test of his transformation wasn't winning her heart, but proving he could protect it without becoming the ruthless man he'd once been. And in the tense hours that followed, with threats closing in and secrets unraveling. The true depth of their bond would be forged in fire. Alexander stared at the photograph under the penthouse lights. The red circle like a bullet wound around Elena and Matteo. Snowflakes swirled against the windows, silent witnesses to the storm inside him. For a moment the old instincts surged, the ruthless strategist who crushed competitors without remorse, ready to unleash lawyers, private investigators, even the shadowy contacts he'd sworn never to use again. But Elena's hand on his arm stopped him. "No," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "We don't become monsters to fight one." He looked at her, really looked. The woman who had taught him that strength could be gentle, that power didn't have to destroy. Matteo slept peacefully on the couch, oblivious, clutching the new stuffed triceratops Alexander had brought home that morning. Something unbreakable settled in Alexander's chest. "You're right," he whispered. "We do this the right way. My way now, not the old way." He made the first call not to security, but to the one person he'd avoided for years, Victoria Lang, the investigative journalist who had once tried to tear his empire apart with an expose. She'd failed, but she'd been fair. And fair was what he needed now. By dawn, Victoria was in the penthouse, laptop open, eyes sharp as she studied the threats. "This isn't just a disgruntled rival," she said after hours of tracing digital breadcrumbs. "It's Marcus Hale, your former partner. The one you bought out 10 years ago. He's bankrupt, desperate, and he's been selling fabricated stories to anyone who'll pay. This photo? Staged intimidation. He wants you to panic, make a mistake, give him leverage for a payout." Alexander's jaw tightened. Marcus had been his closest friend once, co-founder of the company, until greed turned him toxic. The buyout had been brutal but legal, apparently not forgiven. Elena listened quietly, then asked a question that changed everything. What does he really want? Money? An apology? Or just to watch you suffer? Victoria smiled faintly. "All three, probably. But desperate men are careless." We turned the tables. The plan formed swiftly, elegantly. No violence, no bribes, just sunlight on the shadows. Alexander scheduled an emergency press conference for New Year's Eve, the night the city glittered brightest. He leaked just enough to the right outlets to ensure every major network would show up. Marcus, sensing weakness, would come too, Victoria predicted. He always loved an audience. The days leading up were a delicate dance. Alexander moved Elena and Matteo to a quiet estate upstate, surrounded by discreet security and acres of snow-draped evergreens. There, away from the city's glare, something beautiful unfolded. Mornings filled with Matteo's laughter echoing through sunlit rooms as he and Alexander built elaborate blanket forts. Afternoons Elena spent curled by the fireplace, studying for her teaching certification, while Alexander worked remotely, stealing kisses whenever Matteo napped. Evenings they cooked together. Simple meals that tasted better than any Michelin-star restaurant because they were made with love. One crystalline night, under a sky blazing with stars, Alexander led Elena to the frozen pond behind the house. He'd had it cleared and strung with fairy lights. Matteo was asleep inside with the nanny. They skated hand in hand, her laughter breath frosted and free. "I used to think happiness was a weakness," he confessed as they glided slowly. "Something to outgrow. But you make it feel like the strongest thing in the world." She stopped, skates scraping softly, and cupped his face. "You make me believe in second chances. For both of us." He kissed her then, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that promised forever. When they pulled apart, he reached into his coat pocket and drew out the ring he'd carried for weeks, a simple platinum band with a single flawless diamond, chosen not for its size but for its fire. "Marry me, Elena," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Not because I can give you the world, but because you are my world. You and Matteo." Tears sparkled on her lashes as she nodded, whispering yes over and over as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They kissed again, snow beginning to fall around them like confetti from heaven. New Year's Eve arrived in a blaze of anticipation. The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of the Avalon Tower, crystal chandeliers glittering above hundreds of reporters, investors, and curious onlookers. Alexander stepped onto the stage alone at first, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, but calmer than anyone had ever seen him. He began not with business, but with story. "I've spent years building walls," he said into the microphone, voice steady and clear, "believing that vulnerability was dangerous, that kindness was naive. I was wrong." Behind him, a screen flickered to life. Photos of Elena and Mateo, taken with permission. Her radiant smile as she read to children at the local library where she now volunteered. Mateo's joyous face covered in finger paint during an art class Alexander had funded anonymously in Brooklyn. Then came images of the threats, the circled photo, the vicious headlines, all laid bare. "The past weeks have tested me in ways no boardroom ever could," he continued. "Someone I once trusted tried to destroy the most precious things in my life out of bitterness and greed. But I won't respond with the tactics of my past. Instead, I choose transparency, love, family." Gasps rippled to the crowd as Elena appeared at the side of the stage, breathtaking in an emerald gown that shimmered like forest leaves after rain. Mateo in a tiny matching tuxedo holding her hand. They walked Alexander together, and he lifted Mateo into his arms while taking Elena's hand. "This is Elena Ramirez," he announced proudly, "the strongest, kindest woman I've ever known. And this is Mateo, our son in every way that matters. Soon, they will both carry my name, not because I rescued them, but because they rescued me." Cameras flashed like stars. Tears streamed opally down many faces in the audience. He turned to the back of the ballroom where Marcus Hale stood, pale and cornered among the crowd. Security had ensured he couldn't leave. "Marcus," Alexander said directly, voice carrying through the speakers, "your threats end tonight. Every email, every payment, every fabricated story. My team has documented it all. It's already with the authorities. But I'm offering you one chance. Confess publicly, seek the help you need, and I'll ensure the prosecution recommends leniency. Refuse and face the full consequences alone." Marcus's defiance crumbled under the weight of truth and hundreds of witnessing eyes. Minutes later, escorted by police waiting discreetly, he gave a shaking confession to the assembled press, exposing his own desperation, begging forgiveness he didn't deserve, but that Alexander quietly ensured he'd have access to rehabilitation for. As midnight approached, the ballroom screen switched to the live feed of Times Square. The crowd began to count down. Alexander pulled Elena and Mateo close. 10, 9, 8. The world chanted with them. 3, 2, 1. The ball dropped. Cheers erupted. Fireworks exploded across the city sky in cascades of gold and crimson. Alexander kissed Elena as confetti rained down, then lifted Mateo, so the boy could kiss her cheek too. Cameras captured it all. The billionaire, the former maid, and their beautiful son, surrounded by love made visible. In the weeks that followed, the story swept the globe, not as scandal, but as hope. Elena's scholarship fund for single mothers became a foundation with Alexander's matching donations. She began teaching part-time at a public school in Harlem, changing young lives the way she'd changed his. They married in spring beneath cherry blossoms in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, a simple ceremony filled with family. Her mother flown in from Mexico, siblings laughing and dancing late into the night. Years later, when people asked Alexander Voss the secret to his greatest success, he never spoke of algorithms or acquisitions. He simply looked at Elena reading to their children, Mateo now a confident big brother to twin girls with their mother's eyes, and said, "I learned that the heart I thought was frozen was only waiting for the right warmth to melt it, and once it did, it became capable of more than I ever dreamed." And somewhere in a city that never sleeps, a little boy who once offered a stuffed dinosaur to a stranger grew up knowing that kindness could conquer empires, that love wasn't a fairy tale. It was the bravest, most powerful force on earth. Because a maid's gentle heart had not only melted a billionaire's ice, it had forged a legacy of light that would shine for generations.